I dyed my hair blue so my boss would stop blaming me for the hair found in customers' food. I worked at a family restaurant called Mel's Kitchen, where the owner, Tom, was absolutely convinced that every hair found in the food was mine. It didn't matter that we had about 8 other employees with the same brown hair as mine. No, according to Tom, I was the one shedding hair. The first time it happened, a lady found a long brown hair in her pancakes. Tom immediately approached me in front of the entire kitchen and said, "Emma, you need to wear a hairnet or you're fired." I thought, well, whatever, so I started wearing the ridiculous hairnet every shift. But then it happened again. Every time someone complained about hair in their food, Tom would point at me and threaten to dock my pay. I told him over and over that it wasn't me because, well, I was wearing a hairnet. But he would just shake his head and say I was being careless. The other waiters started looking at me strangely, like I was some kind of health code violator. The breaking point came on a busy Saturday morning. A businessman ordered Eggs Benedict and found not 1, but 3 brown hairs tangled in his hollandaise sauce. He was furious and threatened to call the health department. Tom burst into the kitchen, his face red and sweaty, and yelled at me in front of everyone. "Emma, that's it. 1 more hair complaint and you're gone." I was so frustrated I almost cried right there. I knew for certain those hairs weren't mine because I had it pulled back in a tight bun under that stupid hairnet. But Tom didn't realize this. That's when I noticed something that filled me with rage. Sarah, one of the cooks, was standing right behind the grill with her long brown hair completely loose, not even a ponytail in sight. She wasn't wearing any kind of hair protection. But here's the catch. Tom didn't say a word to her because she was his niece. That night I went to CVS and bought the brightest blue dye I could find. Like an electric blue, the kind that screams, "Look at me," from across the room. I dyed my entire head in my small apartment bathroom, leaving blue stains all over the sink and probably on my security deposit. Monday morning I arrived at work looking like a punk. Tom looked at me strangely but didn't say anything. I put on my hairnet as always and got to work. Around lunchtime, an elderly couple ordered the special meatloaf. 10 minutes later they called me over and there it was. A long brown hair on the mashed potatoes. I just watched, and there it was. A long strand of brown hair on the mashed potatoes. I just watched. My heart raced, but not from nervousness. It was pure adrenaline, the kind you feel when you finally have the proof you've been waiting for months. For the first time since I dyed my hair blue, I had concrete, irrefutable evidence that it had never been my hair in the food. I looked at the elderly couple waiting for a solution. The lady had a disgusted look, pushing the plate aside. The husband shook his head, clearly disappointed. Normally, I would call Tom discreetly. He would come to the table, humiliate me in front of the customers, and I would swallow it once again. But today would be different. I felt my hands trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. I took the plate carefully, as if it were precious criminal evidence, because that's exactly what it represented, proof of my innocence and the systematic hypocrisy I had been suffering. I walked slowly toward the counter, where Tom was reviewing some orders. I realized the other employees noticed something different in my posture. Maria, the oldest waitress, looked at me with curiosity. Carlos, the cook, looked up from the grill. And Sarah? Sarah was there, working on the griddle with her brown hair swaying freely, without any concern for hygiene. She didn't even notice what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Months of public humiliation, months of being treated like a problematic employee, months of having my competence questioned for something I had never done. All of that was about to end. I stopped right in the center of the dining room, where all the customers could see and hear me. The restaurant was full for Monday lunch. Perfect. More witnesses. Better. "Tom!" I shouted, with a calm voice but loud enough for half the customers to hear. "I need you to come here and solve 1 more of my hair problems in the food." He approached with that arrogant confidence as always, already preparing the usual speech. I could see in his eyes that he was ready for 1 more public humiliation of irresponsible Emma. "Let me guess," he said loudly so customers could hear. "You forgot to tie your hair properly again?" That's when I made the move that would change everything. Dramatically, with very slow and deliberate gestures, I removed my cap. My electric blue hair fell over my shoulders like a cascade of rebellion. The silence that followed was deafening. Tom literally stood there with his mouth open. Some customers dropped their forks. Even the background music seemed to stop. I pointed to the brown strand on the plate, maintaining eye contact with Tom. "Explain to me how my brown hair is in this food." Tom. His face went from red to white in seconds. He opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Customers began murmuring among themselves, some taking out their phones to film the unfolding drama. "I'm waiting," I continued, keeping my voice calm but firm. "How is it that my blue hair turned brown on this plate?" That's when Sarah finally realized what was happening. She looked at me, then at Tom, then at her own loose hair, and in a desperate attempt to go unnoticed, began looking for a cap, but it was too late. "Are you all seeing this?" I announced to the entire restaurant, turning to show my blue hair to all the customers. "For months I've been blamed for something I never did. Now you're all witnesses to the truth." Tom was still stuttering, trying to find an explanation. "Well, maybe it's from before, when I still what?" "Tom," I interrupted. "When my hair was still brown? That was 3 weeks ago. Are you telling me that a strand of hair was wandering around the kitchen for 3 weeks until it landed on this couple's plate?" The customers' murmurs grew louder. Some people laughed. Others expressed indignation. I was winning the audience. I took out my phone and started recording everything. "People, you won't believe what I'm about to show you." I started a live stream on Instagram. "My name is Emma, and for months I was publicly humiliated by my boss, who blamed me for all the hair found in customers' food. I showed my blue hair to the camera, then the brown strand on the plate, and then Tom, still completely lost. This is Tom, my boss, who still hasn't been able to explain to me how my blue hair turned brown on this plate." Views began to increase rapidly. Supportive comments started appearing. "Go, Emma! Expose that abusive boss! Justice for the blue-haired girl!" Customers began getting up and leaving without paying. Some expressed disgust at the sanitary conditions. One woman said loudly, "If they don't even know where the hair in the food comes from, imagine what else could be wrong here." "And this," I continued, turning the camera towards Sarah, who was trying to hide behind the griddle, "is Sarah, Tom's niece, who has been working without a cap for months while I was humiliated daily." The video already had hundreds of views, and comments kept coming. Hashtags began appearing. "Dr. Blue Hair Justice," "Dr. Justice for Emma," "Dr. Trashed, Toxic Restaurant." Tom finally tried to take control of the situation. "Emma, stop this now or you're fired." I laughed. I literally laughed in his face. "Fire me? Tom, you just lost half your customers. Look around." And it was true. The restaurant was emptying. People were paying their bills quickly and leaving. Some didn't even bother to pay. "Besides," I continued, still recording, "do you really want to fire me in front of thousands of people watching live? Because that would be an excellent way to make this situation even worse for you." Maria, the oldest waitress, approached me. "Emma, can I say something?" She looked at the camera. "I've worked here for 5 years, and I always knew those hairs weren't Emma's." But Tom never wanted to listen. Carlos, the cook, also joined us. "It's true. Tom forbade me from complaining about Sarah's practices. He said if I continued bothering her, I would be fired." The revolt was spreading. Other employees began approaching, each with their own stories of abuse and favoritism. What started as my personal revenge was transforming into a complete exposure of the restaurant's abusive practices. Tom realized he was losing control. "You're all fired," he shouted. "All of you." "Perfect," I replied. "Because then you can explain to your remaining customers, if there are any left, how the restaurant is going to function without employees." The video continued gaining traction. Local influencers started sharing. Food critics in the city expressed horror in the comments. Local media began sending messages asking for interviews. In less than an hour, I had gone from humiliated employee to local celebrity. And Tom? Tom was discovering that his actions had consequences. Consequences he never imagined could come from someone he considered insignificant. But that was just the beginning. What I didn't know was that a local investigative journalist was among the viewers of the live stream, and she was very interested in learning more about the labor practices at Mel's Kitchen. 2 hours later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Support messages were coming in by the thousands. People were sharing their own stories of abusive bosses. The video had gone viral, not just locally, but nationally. Rebecca Martinez from KQED News was the first journalist to call me. "Emma, I saw your live stream. I'd like to do a deeper report on what you experienced at the restaurant. Can I come see you?" I accepted immediately. It was no longer just about me. It was about all the employees who suffer silent abuse every day. We met at a cafe near my house. Rebecca had that serious investigative journalist air, but also a genuine kindness that made me feel comfortable telling everything. "Tell me about the pattern of behavior," she said, recording our conversation. "Was it always like this with other employees?" "Always," I replied. But with me it was worse because I questioned. Tom hated when I tried to defend myself. There were days when he would humiliate me in front of customers just to show who was in charge. I showed her months of documentation I had saved, text messages where Tom threatened to dock my pay, photos of when I came home crying after an especially difficult day, even some audio recordings I had discreetly made during the humiliations. "Did you know this could bring legal trouble for him?" Rebecca asked, flipping through my notes. I suspected, but I didn't know what to do. I need the job, you know? Or needed. Now I don't even know if I still have work. Rebecca laughed. From what I saw in the video, I think that's the least of your worries now. She told me she had already interviewed 3 former restaurant employees who confirmed the pattern of abuse. They all had similar stories: favoritism for Sarah, public humiliation for anyone who questioned, and constant threats of firing. There's more, she said. I received an anonymous tip that the restaurant has serious problems with health surveillance. Apparently, it's not just the hair issue. My stomach turned. What kind of problems? Improper food temperatures, falsified cleaning records, safety equipment in terrible condition. The person who contacted me says Tom instructed employees to lie during inspections. That made me remember several strange situations I had witnessed. Times when Tom hastily cleaned the kitchen area when someone from outside arrived. Times when he asked me to store certain things in the freezer, just for today. I can give you more details about that, I said. I documented some things that seemed strange, but at the time I didn't know they were so serious. Rebecca smiled. Emma, you may not realize it, but you built a solid case against your former boss. This goes far beyond a viral video. The next day, the report aired. It was a 15-minute investigation into abusive practices in family restaurants, using Mel's Kitchen as a case study. Testimonies from former employees, analysis by labor law specialists, and even an interview with a health surveillance inspector explaining the risks of the practices I had documented. Tom tried to do damage control, giving a disastrous interview where he called everything a misunderstanding and said I was a problematic employee who distorted the situation. But the evidence was overwhelming. The most incredible thing was the public reaction. People began canceling reservations, suppliers canceled contracts, and even the mall where the restaurant was located issued a statement saying they were evaluating the situation. Sarah also tried to defend herself on social media, posting a video where she cried and said she never wanted to harm anyone. But the comments were devastating. People weren't interested in apologies. They wanted accountability. That's when I received the call that would change everything. Dr. Patricia Vance, a lawyer specializing in labor law, had seen the report and wanted to talk to me. Emma, you have a very strong case for moral harassment, discrimination, and creating a hostile work environment, she said during our consultation. With the evidence you have, especially the recordings and colleague testimonies, this could be an exemplary case. Exemplary how? I asked. The kind that changes legislation. The kind that makes other employers think twice before treating employees like Tom treated you. That same week, we filed the lawsuit. The repercussion was immediate. Labor rights organizations got in touch offering support. Universities wanted to study the case. Even politicians began using my story in speeches about labor law reform. Tom, desperate, tried to call me several times. He left messages on my phone begging to resolve this without lawyers. But I wasn't interested in negotiations. The pressure on him increased when health surveillance conducted a surprise inspection. They found exactly what Rebecca had reported: multiple violations, falsified records, and Sarah working without protective equipment. The restaurant was temporarily closed and the fines were heavy. Tom couldn't explain to inspectors why only I was required to wear protective equipment while other employees, especially Sarah, had different rules. Mel's Kitchen became synonymous with poor management and labor abuse. Memes were created. Business administration students used the case as an example of what not to do. The restaurant that was once a neighborhood landmark was now a symbol of everything wrong with employee treatment in small businesses. But for me, the greatest satisfaction came when I received a message from a young woman in another city. Emma, I saw your story and decided to report my boss who does similar things. Thank you for giving me courage. That's what it was all about from the beginning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. It was about showing that people like Tom can't continue abusing employees just because they think they can. 6 months later, I was in court. The atmosphere was solemn. Different from the chaos of that day at the restaurant, Tom was sitting at the defense table, visibly dejected. He was no longer the arrogant man who publicly humiliated me. Dr. Patricia presented our case meticulously. The viral recordings, colleague testimonies, media coverage, everything formed a clear picture of systematic abuse. Your Honor, she said, this is not just a case of workplace conflict. It's about how a toxic work environment can devastate a person's life, and how small businesses can abuse vulnerable employees. Tom's defense tried to argue that they were misunderstandings and that my reaction was disproportionate. But when my lawyer presented the evidence, months of documentation, testimonies from multiple employees, and even the health surveillance report, it became clear there was no way to deny the pattern of abuse. The judge was direct. Mr. Tom, your actions constitute systematic moral harassment. The intentional creation of a hostile work environment for a specific employee is unacceptable in any business context. I won the case. The compensation was substantial, enough to compensate not only material damages, but especially moral damages. The judge specifically cited the case as an example of how apparently small behaviors can have devastating impacts on employees' lives. Tom was forced to sell his house to pay the compensation and health surveillance fines. The restaurant never reopened. Sarah got a job elsewhere, but her reputation was also tarnished by association with the case. But the legal victory was only part of the story. What really mattered was what I did with it. I used part of the compensation to realize a dream I didn't even know I had: opening my own business. Blue Hair Snacks started as a simple food truck, but became an instant success. It wasn't just because I had become famous, though that helped. It was because I really cared about every detail. Every employee was treated with respect. Every customer received not just good food, but also an environment where they felt welcome. I hired Maria, Carlos, and other former Mel's Kitchen employees. We created a work environment where no one was afraid to give opinions, where everyone wore the same protective equipment, where favoritism didn't exist. I never thought working could be like this, Maria told me one day, as we cleaned the food truck at the end of the shift. Without fear, without constant tension. The food truck became more than a business. It became a symbol. People came not just for the food, but for what we represented. Employees from other restaurants would stop by to tell their own stories of abuse and ask for advice. I began giving lectures on labor rights at culinary and business schools. I always started by telling my story, showing how an apparently simple situation, hair and food, can hide years of systematic abuse. Dignity at work is not a luxury, I would tell audiences. It's a basic right. And when that right is violated, we have to have the courage to defend ourselves. Universities began using my case as a study, not just about labor rights, but about how social media can be used to expose injustices and create real change. 1 year after the legal victory, I received an email that made me cry. It was from a young woman named Lisa, who worked at a restaurant in another state. Emma, my boss, did similar things to me. He blamed me for problems that weren't mine, humiliated me in front of customers. After seeing your story, I recorded some situations and also sued him. I won. I wanted to thank you for giving me courage not to accept that treatment. Attached to the email was a photo. Lisa was smiling in front of her own food truck, with a large sticker on the side that said, "Inspired by Blue Hair Emma." That was the real victory. It wasn't the compensation money or momentary fame. It was knowing that my story had inspired other people not to accept abusive treatment. I went back to where Mel's Kitchen used to be a few times. Now it was a successful clothing store. The new owner, a lovely woman named Janet, put a small plaque in the place. Here the Blue Hair Revolution was born. Emma, thank you for teaching us about dignity at work. Tom, I heard by chance that he was working as a waiter in a neighboring city. Someone said he had changed, that he treated colleagues with respect. Part of me was happy about that. I never wanted to destroy his life. I just wanted him to understand that his actions had consequences. Sarah also learned some lessons. She looked for me one day, almost 2 years after everything had happened. She came to the food truck and asked to talk. "Emma, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness after so long," she said, with tears in her eyes. "But I needed to tell you that it was all my fault. I knew those hairs were mine, but I let them blame you because it was easier. I could have been cruel. I could have said things that would hurt her. But I realized that holding on to anger wouldn't get me anywhere. Sarah, what matters is that you learned, and that this never happens to anyone again." She nodded and walked away. I never saw her again, but I learned she became an advocate for workers' rights at the company where she worked. 5 years later, Blue Hair Snacks had become a small chain of food trucks. I still dyed my hair blue. It had become my trademark. But it had also become a symbol of resistance and dignity. I received an award from the local Chamber of Commerce for social entrepreneurship. In the speech, I talked about how a situation of abuse had transformed into an opportunity for growth. Sometimes the worst experiences prepare us for the best opportunities, I told the audience. Don't let anyone diminish you. Don't accept abusive treatment. And remember, sometimes all we need is courage to show who we really are. I ended the speech by removing a hair tie and letting my blue strands fall over my shoulders. The audience exploded in applause. After the ceremony, a young woman approached. She had pink hair and determined eyes. "Emma, my name is Ashley. I work at a company where my boss treats me badly. After hearing your story, I decided I'm not going to accept this anymore." I smiled and gave her my card. "Anything you need, call me. No one deserves to be treated like I was treated." She squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for teaching us we can be stronger than we think." I went home that night thinking about how life can be surprising. 6 years ago, I was a scared employee who accepted humiliation because I needed the job. Today, I was a respected businesswoman who used her platform to defend others. It all started with a simple decision: dyeing my hair blue. But in reality, it was much more than that. It was deciding I deserved to be treated with dignity. It was choosing to fight for myself when no one else would. And if I could go back in time and talk to that scared Emma in the apartment bathroom, mixing blue dye, I would tell her, "Do it. Dye that hair."